He walked into the room thinking he owned it. One sentence later, he lost everything. People said confidence looked good on him. But that morning in Dallas, inside the 22nd floor of Horizon Capital, confidence was about to become the most expensive thing Ethan Rivers ever wore. He walked through the glass doors like he owned the skyline. Crisp navy suit hugging his frame, shoes polished so sharp they could have cut the sunlight spilling in from the floor-to-ceiling windows. His assistant trailed behind him, juggling a tablet and a latte Ethan had taken 2 sips from before deciding it wasn't the right temperature. That was Ethan, sharp, calculated, and just a little too sure the world bent to his rules. The conference room was waiting, long walnut table, 12 leather chairs. The air smelled faintly of expensive coffee and quiet tension. Seated around the table were men in tailored suits and women in understated power dresses. The kind of people who handled money with commas most people never see in their lifetime. Ethan pushed open the door, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, gentlemen, ladies," he said, voice smooth like a man greeting an audience rather than equals. Everyone rose to shake his hand. Everyone except the woman at the far end of the table. She didn't even look up at first, just kept scanning the papers in front of her like he wasn't worth the ink on her notes. Ethan clocked her in an instant. Black woman, slim build, simple, elegant black dress, hair neatly styled, no jewelry except a watch that wasn't screaming for attention, no nameplate in front of her, no visible laptop like the others. Probably an assistant, maybe a junior analyst. Ethan didn't bother to guess beyond that. He moved past her, extending his hand to the others, his trademark grin cemented in place. Then, as if she were invisible, he waved his fingers dismissively and said it. "I don't shake hands with staff." A couple of heads turned. Someone coughed. The woman didn't flinch, she just looked up slowly, her expression calm, controlled, the kind of calm that doesn't come from weakness, but from power so solid it doesn't need to announce itself. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Ethan didn't notice the silence that followed. He was too busy thinking about how he'd dominate this meeting, walk out with a signed agreement, and secure the $2 billion that would keep his tech empire from cracking at the edges. But the room suddenly felt different, like everyone else knew something he didn't. She closed the folder, gently, slid it forward, and finally spoke. "Mr. Rivers, thank you for joining us." Her voice was low, smooth, and carried the kind of authority that didn't need volume to command a room. Ethan gave a short laugh, oblivious. "Well, let's make this quick. Time is money, right?" Nobody laughed with him. Nobody said a word. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, not yet. Just the tiniest crack in the mirror of his self-assurance. But what Ethan didn't know was this. The person he just dismissed wasn't staff. She was the managing partner of Horizon Capital, the woman holding the keys to the $2 billion lifeline he desperately needed. Ethan slid into the chair at the head of the table like it was made for him. He always claimed the head seat. It sent a message, control, authority. But this time, no one rushed to make space. The people in this room didn't need his approval. They didn't even need him. "Let's talk numbers," he said, loosening his cufflinks like he was warming up for a performance. "I've got projections that'll make you all very happy." He glanced around, expecting nods, the usual hungry stares of people ready to ride the next billion-dollar wave. Instead, he got stillness. A few polite smiles, but no one leaned in. No one hung on his words. It was like reading a script to an audience that had already seen the ending. Danielle Brooks finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, she stood up from her seat at the far end of the table. Her presence filled the space in a way that felt effortless. She walked toward the large screen mounted on the wall, heels making the faintest click against the polished floor. "Before we go any further," she said, voice calm and measured, "let's one thing straight." Ethan's brows lifted. "Oh," he said lightly, leaning back, trying to keep the upper hand. Danielle tapped the tablet in her hand, and the screen lit up with a sleek presentation. His company's name splashed across the first slide in bold letters, but underneath in smaller print was something that made his stomach dip. Liquidity risk assessment. Ethan's smile didn't falter. but inside his mind was sprinting. Liquidity risk? Why start there? That wasn't the script. He was here to pitch growth, future dominance, not weaknesses. Danielle turned to face him, eyes calm, unreadable. Your numbers are interesting, but before we talk about what you want, we need to talk about what you need. He gave a short laugh, trying to steer things back into his territory. I think my track record speaks for itself. Danielle didn't blink. It does loudly. But so do the reports from your last 2 quarters. The ones showing declining revenue, increasing burn rate, and a legal dispute over that acquisition in Austin. Should I keep going for a second? Ethan forgot to breathe. She wasn't staff. She wasn't just some analyst. She knew things most people didn't, and she was throwing them out like cards on a table. He shifted in his chair. Look, I didn't come here to debate old numbers. I came here because this partnership makes sense for both of us. Partnership, Danielle repeated, letting the word hang in the air like smoke. That's an interesting choice of word. Someone at the table cleared their throat. A man in a gray suit spoke softly like he was trying not to get burned. Danielle, should we proceed as planned? She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on Ethan. Yes, she said. Let's proceed. The way she said it, like she was the only one in control, sent something sharp slicing through Ethan's confidence. He forced another smile, but his jaw felt tight. But what he didn't realize was that this wasn't a pitch meeting anymore. It was a test, and he was already failing. Before this room, before the polished table and the cold stares, Ethan Rivers was a man who never heard the word no. 15 years ago, he was a kid from Tempe, Arizona, sitting in a dorm room with nothing but an idea and a laptop so old it sounded like it might take flight. He built an app, sold it, then built another. By 28, he'd made his first $100 million. By 35, he wasn't just rich. He was headline rich. Forbes covers, magazine, spreads, TV interviews. People loved his story because he fit the dream. Smart, sharp, self-made, and Ethan loved the spotlight back too much. The early hustle hardened into ego. Every room started to feel small because in his mind, he was the biggest name in it. But success has a way of hiding cracks, and lately the cracks were widening. 2 quarters of losses, a lawsuit from a failed acquisition in Austin, a product launch delayed for the 3rd time. He'd poured millions into something that wasn't ready, trying to outpace competitors who were faster and leaner. Then came the investors pulling out quietly at first, then like dominoes. And now Ethan was sitting on a company that looked solid from the outside, but was bleeding inside. Horizon Capital wasn't just a meeting, it was oxygen. Without this $2 billion injection, Ethan's empire would suffocate in less than 6 months. He told himself this morning, play it cool, show strength, own the room. It always worked before. People wanted confidence. They wanted a leader who looked like the future. And Ethan knew how to sell that image better than anyone. So when he'd walked into that conference room, when he saw Danielle and assumed she was staff, the thought didn't even register as wrong. Because in Ethan's world, people like her didn't control billion-dollar deals. They carried coffee trays, managed calendars, maybe ran numbers in the background. That arrogance was about to choke him. He adjusted his cufflinks now, staring at Danielle as she spoke to the group, voice smooth, but with an edge that could cut through steel. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was speaking like someone who didn't need his approval. And that was new for Ethan. For the first time in years, the thought crept in. What if I'm not the one holding the cards? He shifted in his chair, glancing at the presentation again. His name, his company's name, under a title about risk. This wasn't a negotiation. This was an autopsy. He forced a smile anyway. Danielle, I think you and I want the same thing. Growth, market leadership. This deal can make that happen. She tilted her head, studying him like he was a case study. Maybe, she said softly, but I wonder if you and I define leadership the same way. Ethan leaned forward, his voice carrying that old edge of confidence. I've led every step of the way to get here. That's not changing. Danielle's lips curved into the faintest smile. We'll see. But what Ethan didn't know was that Danielle had already made her decision before he walked into the room, and every word out of his mouth was only proving her right. Danielle Brooks had learned long ago that power doesn't always announce itself. It sits quietly, listens carefully, and speaks only when it's time to end the conversation. She watched Ethan Rivers now, a man who thought every second of silence was an opportunity for him to fill the air. He was still talking, words smooth and confident, but they washed over her like background noise. She'd already decided what Horizon Capital would do, and it had nothing to do with his projections. This wasn't about numbers. Not really. It was about respect. Danielle remembered the exact moment his words landed. "I don't shake hands with staff." She didn't flinch then. Didn't let it break the still surface she kept for situations like this. But inside some... Ethan shifted. Not because of what he thought of her, but because of what that attitude represented. Men like Ethan built fortunes thinking they were the exception to every rule. That money excused arrogance. That people were just pieces on a board they controlled. She'd dealt with men like him before, and she knew something he didn't. They always believed their empire made them untouchable. Her background wasn't polished country clubs or family connections. Danielle grew up in Baton Rouge, raised by a single mother who worked nights in a hospital to keep food on the table. Every room Danielle walked into, she was told, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, that she didn't belong. But she stayed, she learned, she climbed, and now she was here, managing partner at Horizon Capital with the power to decide whether Ethan Rivers' empire would live or die. Danielle tapped her screen, moving the presentation forward. Charts, numbers, risk assessments filled the wall. She saw Ethan's jaw tighten as the words cash flow concerns appeared in bold red letters. "We've reviewed your proposal," she said, her tone even professional. "But our firm has serious reservations about the sustainability of your model." Ethan leaned forward, voice a shade sharper now. "Reservations, Danielle, with all due respect." She cut him off without raising her voice. "Respect is the foundation of any deal, Mr. Rivers, and without it, everything else collapses." The room went still. Every set of eyes flicked between them, sensing the weight under those words. Ethan's face shifted just slightly, but enough for her to see it. The flicker of realization. Danielle let the silence breathe. In negotiations, silence is a weapon, and right now it was pressing against his pride like a blade. Finally, she closed her tablet and stepped back to the head of the table. Not where Ethan sat, but where she stood in control of everything. "We've made our decision," she said. Her voice didn't need to be loud because certainty carried its own echo. But Ethan still didn't see the ground falling out from under him. Not yet. That moment was seconds away. Ethan felt his pulse pick up. Those 5 words, "We've made our decision," didn't sound like a prelude to good news. He leaned forward, flashing the kind of smile that had closed deals before breakfast. "Great," he said lightly, forcing a chuckle. "So, let's make it official." Danielle didn't move. Her calm presence was starting to feel like a wall he couldn't climb. She clasped her hands in front of her, voice steady, unshaken. "Horizon Capital will not be proceeding with this deal." The words landed like a gavel, sharp, final. Ethan blinked, the smile freezing on his face. "Excuse me, your proposal doesn't align with our values or long-term strategy," Danielle replied, each syllable measured like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. She didn't need to raise her voice. Power was in the restraint. Ethan felt heat creeping up his neck. "Danielle, let's not pretend this isn't about numbers. My company is leading in market share. We're projecting a 40%. "This isn't about numbers," she interrupted, her eyes locked on his, steady as stone. "It's about character." The room stayed silent. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the AC, like the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan's throat went dry. He wanted to argue, to fight, but the way she oaked at him, calm, certain, like a queen moving the last piece on a chessboard, made him feel small. She stepped closer, her voice dropping just enough that only he could hear. "When you walked in here, you made a choice. A simple gesture could have built a bridge. Instead, you burned it before we even spoke." Ethan opened his mouth, then shut it again. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. Danielle turned to the others. "This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone." Chairs scraped softly as the board members began to rise, gathering their papers without looking at him. Ethan stayed seated, gripping the edge of the table like it might keep him from sliding under. Finally, he found his voice. "Danielle, wait. This is $2 billion. That's not a small decision." She paused at the door and looked back at him, expression calm, unreadable. "Neither is respect, Mr. Rivers." And then she was gone, just like that. Ethan sat there, the weight of her words pressing down on him harder than any financial loss, because deep down he knew this wasn't just a deal. This was the moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life, but the worst was yet to come. What Ethan didn't realize was that Danielle's quiet exit was about to echo far beyond that room, into headlines, boardrooms, and the very empire he thought was untouchable. The next morning, Ethan Rivers woke to a storm not outside, on his phone. His screen lit up with notifications like fireworks, missed calls from his CFO, dozens of messages from board members, news alerts stacked on top of each other, each headline worse than the last. Horizon Capital pulls $2 billion backing from Rivers Tech amid leadership concerns. Market questions Ethan Rivers' stability after sudden investor exit. Did arrogance sink the deal of the year? Ethan sat on the edge of his California king bed, staring at the words like they belonged to someone else. This was supposed to be a quiet meeting, confidential, but clearly someone in that room had decided otherwise. And if he had to guess, he knew who. He swiped open his email. More bad news. 2 secondary investors had already pulled out, citing risk factors. Stock futures were plummeting. By mid-morning, Rivers Tech had lost nearly $500 million in market value before the markets even opened. His phone rang again. It was his lawyer, voice tight with urgency. "Ethan, this is spiraling. Horizon's statement went public an hour ago. They didn't just reject the deal. They cited a lack of cultural alignment. You know what that means?" Ethan gritted his teeth. "It means they're trying to paint me as don't say it." The lawyer cut in. "Just listen. Social media is all over it. There's a clip trending." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Clip? What clip?" He clicked the link the lawyer sent and felt the blood drain from his face. It was grainy, shot on a phone from inside the meeting room, just enough to catch his voice clear as day. "I don't shake hands with staff." 7 words. That was all it took to set the internet on fire. Comments poured in by the thousands. Wow. Imagine thinking money buys basic manners. Danielle Brooks is a legend for how she handled this. Respect is free. He couldn't afford it. His name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Investors weren't just questioning his leadership. They were questioning his humanity. By noon, his PR team called an emergency meeting. The advic was predictable. Apologize, spin it, soften the edges. But the truth was raw. Ethan had built his empire on image, and that image was now cracking in real time. He stared at his reflection in the dark screen of his tablet, and for the first time, the man looking back didn't feel untouchable. He felt exposed. But it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the one thing he'd always dismissed as a weakness: humility. And the final blow was coming. A conversation that would strip away whatever illusion of control he thought he had left. By evening, Ethan was sitting in the corner office of his glass tower, staring at a skyline that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. His phone had stopped ringing, not because the chaos ended, because there was nothing left to say. The $2 billion lifeline was gone. The follow-up investors gone too. And tomorrow the stock market would open to a bloodbath he couldn't stop. He leaned back in his chair, mind spinning. How did it all collapse in less than 24 hours? 1 meeting, 1 sentence, 7 words. "I don't shake hands with staff." The truth hit him like a punch. It wasn't the money that ruined him. It was the attitude, the arrogance that made him believe people didn't matter. Only deals did. And now the person he underestimated the most had shown him what real power looked like. Danielle Brooks didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue or insult him. She simply acted with dignity, and that dignity carried more weight than his billions ever could. He opened his laptop, typed her name into the search bar, and read headlines praising her leadership, her grace, her decisiveness. Every word felt like a mirror reflecting what he wasn't. For the first time in years, Ethan whispered something he hadn't said since those early college days. "I was wrong, but it was too late. Some lessons come cheap." This one cost him an empire. Respect is free, but arrogance can cost everything. No matter how high you climb, you never outgrow basic humanity. People remember how you treat them, especially when you think no one is watching. If this story made you think twice about the power of humility and respect, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that show what really matters in